Kia ora everybody, welcome to episode 52 of the Stag where I sit down with Dr. Greg Emerson. Greg's got a unique perspective on health and how we adapt to our ever-changing environment. And on the one hand, he's an emergency medicine specialist. He's also got a background in diving medicine, and also he's internationally renowned when it comes to integrative medicine. On the other hand, he's quite passionate about permaculture. He had a farm himself. He's passionate about sustainable living, and he's also really enthusiastic about wilderness survival. He works at that exciting crossroads between scientific evidence and evolutionary-based knowledge, that ancestral health sort of paradigm. He's a proud father, and he hopes to leave the world a better place for his children, and he's really optimistic about what we can achieve, and he's got a real focus around longevity and optimising our health and living better lives, living that life that is full to the limit. Something that Karen's in talked about, that live long and die fast sort of thing, so that our lifespan is increased and not our sick span is increased. Awesome episode. We do this in the outdoors, on the grass. It's a great chat. We could have spoken for hours, and I think Greg will be one of those people that we bring back on just because he's a wealth of knowledge on so many different topics. Hope you enjoy, and let's get into it. Cheers.
Good morning, everybody. We're sitting in one of my favourite places in Byron Bay Harvest in Newrybar, and I'm sitting here with Dr. Greg Emerson. It's probably poignant of us to say before we get going that Greg's a doctor, but whilst everything he talks about here will be based in clinical experience and research, this is not medical advice. And there's no patient-doctor relationship going on here. Anyway, enough of that stuff.
Enough of the legal jargon.
Yeah. What have you been doing this weekend, Greg?
I came down yesterday because Byron Bay is kind of... I'm from Nelson originally, so Byron is very Nelson-esque in its kind of artistic flavour and its geography and its kind of relaxed attitude to life. So I came down yesterday and spent some time on the beach and hiked to Minion Falls, which is about a 100-metre waterfall in the hinterland here. And because I have such an interest in the health benefits of cold water thermogenesis, I spent some time in the refreshing cool waters of Minion Falls.
Nice. And is there anything that you find around hard water or raw water or water that's flown over massive amounts of rocks and builds lots of energy as it falls down, or is that just a bit hooly-dooly?
You mean to drink or to bathe in?
Both? Yeah.
I think there are other attributes of water which are much more important that people don't really understand, which kind of supersede that. But I think, the basic premise is that spring water, which is bubbled up by its own pressure through natural filters, that is the best water for us to drink. That's a reasonable base premise. There are some geographical sub-clauses to that which might change it, but that's a good starting space, that it's full of minerals. And of course the trouble is most of the spring water that we buy is not actually spring water, it's well water, which means it has been pumped to the surface. Whereas you go to Wanaka, one of my favourite places to get water from is Wanaka, because you've got that natural spring just beside the lake where it just pours out. If you have to pump it from an underground cavern to the surface, you've bypassed all the natural filtration place and the mineralisation phase of coming through the rocks. So if you can find a true natural spring where it has come to the surface by itself, that's probably the premier water that we drink. With the subclauses, there are some geographical kind of considerations with that as well, which involves the deuterium concept of water, which we might talk about later.
Awesome. And so you said you're from Nelson, and this place gives you that familiar feeling of home. Who's Greg Emerson today?
Oh, that's a great question. A very different person to the professional basketball player from Nelson from the late 80s. But I wouldn't change anything about myself. But I think probably the biggest area of change is that I'm a very left-brained person. I'm very good. I've been an emergency physician. And the work I do, I'm very naturally left-brained. And I think that the Greg Emerson of today is much more interested in expanding his whole neural network and going, okay, well, look, you're not naturally right-brained, but that's an area of my brain that I really want to develop and open up. So kind of started this new journey recently of actually kind of looking at ways of expanding neural connections to become a much more complete person. But I would never look back at anything I've done and gone, well, that was bad. I mean, we all know that life's a journey, and I've loved the journey, made some mistakes, corrected it, and become the person I am today, which I'm very happy for. We have this conversation in 5 years' time, though. It'll be a different one again. But that's the fun thing about life, isn't it? A constant journey.
And so you say about new neurogenesis. As a basketball player, you're using both sides of your body. You're in a high energy state. You've got blood flow everywhere. Do you think you were more creative there, or you're too focused?
No. Yeah, the opposite. In fact, that was my strength.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to play against some amazing athletes. Some really amazing athletes, and I'm not an amazing athlete. I was a successful professional athlete because of determination. And I can remember in 1989, I was at the New Zealand trials, and basketball coach at the time then was Keith Meyer, and we're in the national trials, and I am absolutely and utterly dominating. I'm scoring at will at the national trials, and I'm probably the least athletic person there. And at one stage, Keith Meyer pulls everyone into a huddle. There must have been like 20 top basketball players from around New Zealand, the top 20. And he says, look, he points at me and he goes, this guy can't run, he can't jump, and he can't shoot, which in a way is kind of insulting. But I knew what he was trying to say. But he is completely and utterly dominating this trial through sheer determination. He's the first guy down the court to get the layup, and he's the first guy back on defense. And, although it was kind of insulting in a way, and it wasn't meant as an insult, it was meant as a compliment. And even then, my athletic career was based on determination rather than natural artistic skills. I wasn't doing any 360 dunks or shit like that. I was just I was the first guy at practice, and I was the first guy down the court. Although that also was I was telling a friend of mine yesterday, I was at the it could get you into trouble too. I was playing basketball for the University of Otago, and we were in the championship game. And there was, I always remember this as a good life lesson. And we were up by 1 point, and there was 20 seconds to go. And I got past the ball, and I was just over the half court mark. And all I had to do was hold on the ball, and we would have won the game. Mm. But I saw the half court to the basket completely open. And my brain, who's got to be the lead guitarist in the band, goes, here's a great opportunity for me to do a sensational dunk to win us the game. So, of course, I head off, tearing down the court to do this dunk, don't see the other player coming from my left trying to block my shot until the last minute when I block his hands away so I can get the dunk. I get called for an offensive foul, they get 2 free throws, get them both, and we lose by 1. So, determination, good. Being the lead singer in the rock band, good. I'm never going to be the bass player. Always got to be the lead singer. Sometimes that comes with some consequences. So I had to learn to temper that a little bit as well, and know when to pull a trigger and not to pull a trigger. Yeah.
So how do you balance that with medical studies? I guess you call it career because it's a big investment. How did you balance that? Or did that come later?
Well, no. Oh, no, I see. No, I did that first.
Yeah.
I got my medical degree. I got a job working as a first and second year doctor at Nelson Hospital. And just because of me wanting to be the lead singer, I just rang up the head coach of the Nelson Giants and said, hey, you want me. Yeah. You need me in your team. And, I went along and played a couple of games and got the gig, which was fantastic. But again, that was through grit and determination as well. Because one of my friends, you'll go know of him because he was the Richie McCaw movie.
Yeah.
When Richie's kind of lost the first World Cup, and they had that reputation of being chokers.
Yeah.
And so they bring in, and he decides to come back. as does the coach, who was Graham Henry, which I thought was a very, very, for both of them, very brave. Because if they lost that next one, hello, moving to Australia, not living in New Zealand anymore. So they brought in a psychiatrist to work with them called Kerry Evans. Now, Kerry was my lab partner at med school.
Awesome.
And, you know, we all hated him. Hated him because he was so freaking amazing. You know, he was playing with the All... He's a super nice guy. He's super intelligent. He's a great-looking guy. He was playing for the All Whites, and he was away for half of the year on tournaments, and he'd come back and he'd get all A's in his exams. And, you know, that guy... I mean, I'm not going to belittle how much work he must have done, but he's just got that natural... It was like me playing basketball against some of the, you know, the Michael Jordan-esque players, just that natural talent, which I never had. Mine was graft. So it kind of, it served me well in both my chosen careers, in medicine and studying hard and working hard, and my athletic career, which was, again, based on grit and determination rather than any natural you know, skill.
While we're on the topic of basketball, growing up in New Zealand in the 90s, Nelson Giants were the Kings and Southland Sharks were the Doldrums. And it's awesome to see the Southland Sharks doing well now. But
well, they weren't around when I was playing.
There
was no Southland Sharks. So I finished in '92. They came a long time afterwards, I think.
Well, I think they might have got Nuggets, might have just kept them at bay or get them down or something. But what is it about the region of Nelson that basketball seems to go so well?
Oh, I think because it's geographical location, it means you don't have to work hard on recruiting people. I mean, ultimately, you know, when I was playing, we were for, you know, either the bottom or the second bottom of the table. But I think after that, it worked out that it had geographical. You got to, anything in life, you got to work out what are my strengths. And Nelson worked out its strength was its geography. And it could attract some really good talent. It was never going to be the best basketball team in the world based on local population. It had to recruit. And so I said, how are we going to recruit the best? And we well, hang on, we live in this magical part of the world. We'll use that. And they did. But there's an interesting story about that as well. Not many people know, because I've never really told the story, but I left Nelson after 2 years of working there as a doctor and playing basketball, and because you could only do 2 years as a junior doctor at Nelson at that stage, so you had to go somewhere else. And so I went off to study to be a cardiologist in Auckland, but I realised after a year I didn't want to be a cardiologist, and I was missing playing basketball so much. So I decided I'd ring up the coach, who was a new coach in Nelson, and say, look, I'm coming back. And I expected to walk straight in, because basically, you know, there was me and there was Chris Simpson, and we kind of was the reason that Nelson still has a basketball team in a way, because we were facing relegation. So Chris and I prevented us being relegated in a game against Ponsonby. So I'm expecting to walk straight back into the team. And the coach was a new coach, goes, not so fast. You have to come back and try out. And because of I'm 26 back then, full of ego and bluster, I'm like, what do you mean come back and try out? Don't you know who I am? And he was like, yeah, you got to come back and try out. And I was getting, well, I ain't coming back and trying out, thank you very much. I love the place, but I'm not trying out. So I ring up Steve McKean in New Plymouth and go, look, hey, you interested? Who at that stage, New Plymouth was the #1 team in the country. And I said, you interested in me coming and joining you? And he said, hell yes, you scored 36 points against us last year. We'll take you. So that's how I ended up playing for the Taranaki Bulls, which was and we were an extraordinary team back then, an extraordinary team. We had some of the greats of New Zealand basketball, Jacques Tuz and Willie Burton and Byron Vaitoe and Darren Shaw and Steve Campbell and John Carr. It was an extraordinary team, and we just completely dominated while I was there. And it was there that I decided that in my 2 years in New Plymouth that I wanted to train in emergency medicine and eventually move to Australia. So if it wasn't for that phone call from the with the Nelson coach, so you got to, and my ego getting in the way, you and I wouldn't be sitting here talking now. I don't know what I'd be doing, but I probably wouldn't have done emergency medicine. If I wouldn't have gone to New Plymouth, I wouldn't have done emergency medicine. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now. So it's one of those sliding doors moments in your life where you either turn left or you turn right, and your life's completely different based on that.
Nice. And so what drove you away from cardiology, and what do you think pulled you into emergency?
Oh, I think the excitement of emergency medicine. Cardiology is kind of, and even at that stage I had an interest in lifestyle and fitness. And cardiology is more about what drugs can I prescribe for your heart attack and can I put a stent in. And I decided it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And at that stage in my life I was enamoured with excitement and the thrill, and emergency medicine was helicopter flights to trauma and aeromedical retrieval and life and death situations. And again, I'm very good at that stuff because of the way my brain works. So again, it was looking at my strengths. What were my strengths then? My strengths were protocol and following guidelines and working hard, and emergency medicine really, and squeezing the juice out of life. And emergency medicine for a while gives you that. It's difficult in the long run. You're 28, somebody says, Greg, you've got to jump in the helicopter and go out to that major car accident. You go, hell yes. You're 48 and you're going, oh, really? I kind of want to go home and see my kids. But, it gave me a great basis. If you can run an emergency department, you've got pretty much all aspects of medicine covered in a way. It does build very good doctors.
Nice. So how I came on to you, Greg, was the guys at Organic Mechanic, who also make great kombucha. I no longer follow them due to the vegan propaganda stuff that I got from their page. But,
oh, really?
But yeah,
hashtag vegan.
Yeah,
Joe Rogan would love that.
The vegan cat.
The vegan cat. Yeah.
You and Ben Logan, who we've had on early on, hosted those guys for a bit of an outdoor expedition. And I was like, man, this is awesome. What was your sort of area of expertise for outdoor survival and expeditions?
Oh, well, I kind of had two. One was I originally started doing those courses with Ben because I was teaching wilderness first aid and emergency management. Particularly that stage, there had been a lot of Christchurch earthquakes. It wasn't long after the Christchurch earthquake tragedy, so we were putting on practical demonstrations for people to how to, cope with injuries in the field and stuff. And that was my main expertise. But before that, I'd trained with some special forces guys in Australia up on the Sunshine Coast, because I had moved from living in a city to living on a farm. So I wanted to, and I had 50 acres in the hinterland around here, so I needed some more practical skills, which I didn't have. So that was kind of sparked my interest in surviving in the wilderness, because I needed to be able to make, I was living in a little cabin in the middle of nowhere. I needed how to make a fire and survive if I lost water and stuff like that. So I went and trained with some retired SAS personnel up in the Sunshine Coast and did stuff on urban evasion and escape and evasion and how to live in the wilderness. And then I'd travelled to Sedona in Arizona, and I was fortunate enough to spend a few days with an Apache elder there who would take me out into the Arizona desert, and because I had an interest in wild foods, he was showing me about the foods the Apache ate and the caves they used to eat in and how they used to use the juniper tree for mattresses and stuff. So I did get a kind of unique education in terms of wilderness survival. I mean, I've always been like that. I'm like, if I want to learn how to do something in medicine, I will find the best person in the world and I'll go and train with them. And I don't really, if I'm going to train in wilderness survival, I'm going to train with a guy who spent 10 years behind lines in Afghanistan, surviving in the mountains, which is what I did with Rich Hungerford up on the Sunshine Coast. And I want to live with I want to learn from an Apache whose grandfather, was living in a cave, living off the land in Arizona. So I've always prided myself on going and training from the best. So I had this kind of unique education in terms of wilderness survival from Special Forces soldiers and Native American Indians. And I think, I don't want to learn from a textbook. I'm very much, the whole basis of my life is based around congruency. That if I see you teaching something but you're not living that life, I'm not interested. So if I wanted to learn from people who had lived it. And so I got a unique perspective on survival that perhaps other people didn't. And so that allowed me to teach some of that on the courses with Ben.
Nice. And so it's in the middle of Wanaka, and you go swimming in that lake in the middle of summer and it's still not the warmest. You guys were there in the middle of winter jumping into those creeks. What is it about the cold that, whilst it might kill us if we get too much of it, in small doses can be great?
Well, the cold is fascinating. One, there's ego involved.
Yeah.
Yes, I can look. There's a glacier 100 metres up the river, and I've just got in 2-degree water. Although I actually find getting in cold water in Wanaka somewhat easier than sometimes in Australia, because the ambient air temperature is actually, if it's -2 degrees in the air and the water's 3 degrees, by the time you've got all your kit off and you're standing there in your freaking undies about to get in the water, you're absolutely freezing. So going from -2 air temperature to 3 degrees in the water can be, not as bad as it sounds.
I've even found that with the 6-degree morning getting into 12-degree water, that is actually quite cool.
Yeah, you get in the water to warm up in some ways.
Yeah.
So there was some ego involved, and ego's not necessarily a bad thing. It was like, not many people do this. I'd like to, it's always been part of my makeup. I want to do stuff that other people think I can't. It's driven me a lot. So there was that aspect. There's the aspect of the beautiful surroundings you do it in. I'd much rather do that in Wanaka than have a cold shower in my bathroom.
Yeah. Or your freezer. You still got that ready?
Yeah, I still got the freezer. Still got the freezer ready to go. But then there's the health benefits, and the health benefits are extraordinary. And there's anthropological reasons for that, because you and I are being of Northern European descent.
Mm-hmm.
The cold is our friend. If you're of African descent, it's less important. The sun is much more important. You get most of your health benefits. The sun, for an African person of African descent, with their highly melanized skin, the sun is the most important thing for us. Whereas if you're Northern European descent, it's the cold. It's genetically encoded in our bodies that we respond to the cold from a mitochondrial perspective. And that's, in fact, how, anthropologically, how you and I got less melanized skin, because as we walked out of Africa, going up to, as we headed north to Europe, it got very cold and the sun disappeared. So our environment selected for people who responded to the cold, and it selected out people with lighter skins, because the darker your skin, the less vitamin D you got as the sun disappeared. And we know how vitamin D is so critical for both your immune system and cancer. So the more highly melanized people died from infections, and the fairer skins over time were evolutionary selected. So, people of Northern European descent are encoded in their genes to respond to the cold. We don't need as much sun, because you and I need to spend, half an hour in the sun in summer in Australia, and we've topped up our vitamin D. I got a good friend in Texas, Roby Mitchell. He's very highly melanized, and he's going to have to spend 2 or 3 hours in the sun to get the same benefit from vitamin D. So the cold is we're genetically predisposed to the getting benefits from the cold. But the other real benefit is the benefit you get in your mitochondria. And we haven't talked much about the mitochondria, but if I can quickly summarize it, when you get in cold water, you get cold. So your body wants to heat you up. And what heats you up is the mitochondria. The mitochondria produce our energy, and they produce our heat. And so science has now shown that the mitochondria inside your cells, of which you've got about 1 quadrillion mitochondria in your body, they heat up to 50 degrees to warm you up. Now here's the magic. This is where the magic starts. The mitochondria are full of a special water called matrix water. Now if we put water in a freezer, and a glass bottle expands and breaks the bottle, correct?
Yeah.
So when the water heats up, it constricts. Now the way it gets smaller. Now the way the mitochondria work is they basically take electrons from food, pass them along 5 respiratory proteins in the inner wall of the mitochondria, and when they pass those electrons across that, ultimately they produce ATP as energy and heat. Now here's the magic. The closer those 5 respiratory proteins are together, the more efficient that process is. And the more efficient that process is, the healthier you will be and the longer you will live. And when those mitochondria get hot, we said that cold water expands, hot water constricts. So when the mitochondria heat up to 50 degrees to keep us warm, the water constricts as hot water does. So it brings those 5 respiratory proteins closer together. So our whole mitochondrial system works a lot better. It's called the heteroplasmy rate. And there's a great video on YouTube of a man on Brighton Beach. People should have a look. Who, if you search on YouTube, Brighton Beach and multiple sclerosis, there's a man at Brighton Beach in the UK who's got multiple sclerosis and can hardly walk. But every time he gets in the cold water, he can come out of the water and he's walking completely normally again. Oh. And he kind of says that he thinks it's because his demyelinating lesions have shrunk. He's kind of right, but what he's really seeing is his heteroplasmy rate has shortened, so he's passing electrons through his mitochondrial respiratory proteins much more efficiently, so his nerves works better. And that's just an extraordinary demonstration of how your heteroplasmy rate and your mitochondrial dysfunction are so important for our health and longevity.
Nice. And so with combining the cold with the Wim Hof method, is the cold doing anything for our immunity, or is it the breath and the extra? I think it works from extra carbon dioxide. What's
oh no! I mean, if you're going to get a benefit from your immune system, you want it to be long lasting.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just kind of do the Wim Hof hyperventilation, even though I'm a big fan of the breathing technique. But I think the real benefit for the breathing for me is it allows me to stay in the water longer.
Yeah. And
the longer I can stay in the water, the more mitochondria I get. Because basically the other thing that happens when you get cold is that we have two basic forms of fat in our body, as you know, white fat and brown fat. White fat stores energy, brown fat burns it. And so the more brown fat you've got, the more energy you'll have, and the more optimal your weight will be. And brown fat is brown because it's full of mitochondria. So the longer you can stay in the cold water and be comfortable, the more you're going to convert white fat to brown fat. So I think the real benefit long-term, that is, not short-term, long-term, is that the breathing allows you to get more benefit from the cold water exposure. And then I think the benefit to your immune system comes because every cell in your body is full of mitochondria, except your red blood cells. And the more energy dependent your body, the more mitochondria will have. So the areas in the body with the most mitochondria are the ovaries, have the highest amount of mitochondria, then the brain and the heart, and the immune system would be following up closely, because the immune system, of course, very highly energy dependent. So the more optimal your mitochondria are, the more optimum your immune system is going to be. I haven't been sick for 10 years, nothing.
Nice.
Nothing, because of my dedication to improving the health of my mitochondria.
Now, you just said something there. The ovaries are the richest in mitochondria, and there's a condition that is getting more and more numerous in younger women, polycystic ovaries.
Yeah.
And there's a big thought that that's insulin resistance of the ovaries. And so then the mitochondria aren't working, or you just got an energy breakdown in that and signaling's not working? What's your theory?
So, I don't have a theory. There's science.
I
mean, even though I do, the funny thing is in medicine, if you step slightly out of the normal medical paradigm, you're seen as doing quackery. Whereas there's nothing I do which is not in the scientific literature. And the scientific literature is overwhelming with this stuff. And it's interesting that there's two really interesting hormones when it comes to polycystic ovaries. One is insulin, and the other one is leptin, which is the fat storage hormone. And the problem with insulin, because we all consume, well, have in the past anyway, because we got told, as you know, fat was bad and sugar was good, we all had these very high carbohydrate diets. Higher carbohydrate diet, the higher your insulin level, and high levels of insulin damage the wall of the ovary. And it thickens and scars. And so what happens is when the brain is signaling the ovary to ovulate, it can't release the egg because the wall is scarred. And so the brain starts shouting at the ovaries, saying, come on, you've got to release some eggs, and it keeps stimulating the ovaries. It's kind of like being in a movie theatre and shouting fire while everybody runs for the door, but the door's locked. It's a disaster. That's exactly what's happening in polycystic ovaries. You've got all these eggs trying to develop, which can't get out through the ovary. But the thing that can get out through the ovary is testosterone, which is why polycystic ovary people with polycystic ovary syndrome get a lot of androgenic features. They get acne and excessive hair growth because the ovaries are being thrashed, but not releasing eggs, they're just releasing testosterone. So, so one of the keys to that is having a less highly refined carbohydrate diet and a diet based more on healthy fat. And that's where the mitochondria come in, because the mitochondria respond much better to a healthy fat, a ketogenic diet, rather than a high carbohydrate diet. They function much better. So that's how the mitochondria. And the second hormone, which is really important, is leptin, which is your fat control hormone. And it's interesting because leptin is the master hormone for the body. And we've only known about it for about 15 years. And here's the really freaky thing, is leptin chooses the egg. Leptin is the hormone which decides today, in this environment, in this climate, this egg is going to be the most likely one to succeed. The sperm is just a race. Yeah. It's just you and I as sperm run hard, run fast to get the prize, and the biggest, strongest, fastest gets there. It's a random event. But the egg is chosen. And the really freaky thing, and the amazing thing, and the magic about that is that means you and I are not random choices. We have been chosen to be here at that time in that environment, which I find really mind-boggling. And part of my new expansion of my neural circuits is trying to get a better understanding of some of these things that we think we know, but we don't really know at all, about why you and I are actually here, why we've been selected to be here rather than just being a random event. I find it fascinating. So if you can get your leptin under control and you can get your insulin under control, polycystic ovaries goes away. And the way to get leptin under control, the number one thing about, the three top things about leptin to optimize it, to make it work properly, is to reduce inflammation in the body, because it's inflammation in the brain which causes the leptin resistance. We can talk about that more later on if you want to. Second thing is the cold, because the cold is the number one way to increase the sensitivity of the leptin. And the third is moving to a more high-fat seasonal diet, which is eaten within the light cycle. And if you can do that, you then optimize your leptin production as well, or the leptin sensitivity. You want your hormones receptors to be sensitive. You want the hormones to be able to do the job. And if you've got resistance, see, the problems with insulin resistance and leptin resistance is not the hormones, it's the fact that the receptors aren't working properly. So you've got these high levels of hormones screaming at the receptors, and the receptors can't hear them, so the job's not being done. So if you can sensitize the receptors, and that's another thing that cold does, is the cold sensitizes receptors. So when people say, well, you know, it's hard for me to keep my vitamin D levels up over winter, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you embrace the cold, because the cold will sensitize your receptors. So you don't need as much vitamin D. You know, people are running around over winter, you know, gobbling up vitamin D supplements which don't work when they don't necessarily need to do so. We've done very well as a species for a long time without having to take vitamin D supplements. We stock up vitamin D in summer, and then over winter, when it gets cold, as long as we embrace the cold and don't, not move outside the house without the heaters on, as long as we embrace the cold, then your receptors become much more sensitive. You don't need as much vitamin D to get the same benefit from. And that's such a key understanding. Because taking vitamin D supplements, I'm not a supporter of. It's a steroid hormone. I think people are gobbling up huge amounts of steroid hormones, completely and utterly mucking up the typical feedback loop that you and I have in our bodies to keep everything under control, that we're messing with because we think we're really smart. But you and I, the scientist in the white coat, is never as smart as Mother Nature. She's been around for 8.5 billion years, 14 billion years. Well, how old's the planet? Planet Earth's 4.5 billion years. That's a lot of learning, and the 40-year-old scientist doing a scientific, discipline which is maybe, a couple of 100 years old, is not nearly as smart as 4.5 years of a billion years of Mother Nature.
So it's interesting you say leptin's 15 years old. 8 or I must be going on 9 years ago when I was at Otago, and I was looking at, well, if I don't get into optometry, what am I going to do? And one of those options was honours, and that was to do a leptin resistance model in rats. So
really,
yeah,
it's a fascinating field. Of course, what the drug companies did is the drug companies gone, great, leptin hormone helps you lose weight, some money here. Let's make drugs which work like leptin. Of course, the problem was that leptin's not the problem; it was the receptor's the problem. It's the receptor resistance which is the problem. So none of the leptin drugs work. So that field of medicine disappeared, because if you can't make money out of it, there's no point pursuing it.
I guess it's a bit like type 2 diabetes with feeding people on insulin. It keeps their sugars down for a while and the GP's happy, but realistically, another few years and things are going bad.
Yeah, there's no shortcuts sometimes.
You said mitochondria, am I right that that does come from our mother?
Mitochondria, yes, you inherit your mitochondria from your mother.
Yeah.
So we should choose our mothers very carefully.
Yes. And again, you said MS. Now in optometry there's glaucoma, and I've all of a sudden put a very high emphasis on people with maternal glaucoma history because of that energy source for those nerves. Are there any sort of other nervous system things that you think, or maternal history is very, very important?
Well, your maternal history is important for everything, and luckily the women in my extended family have lived a very long time, which I'm very grateful for. My grandmother got to 98.
Wow.
But of course the big thing with glaucoma in the eyes these days is the blue light exposure.
Yeah.
So, and of course, that's where the mitochondria tie into that as well, because blue light, we've now discovered the pigment in the back of the eye, which is damaged by the blue light, which leads to macular degeneration. Ultimately, glaucoma is an inflammatory disorder, and the blue light from the computer screens and the LED lights and the mobile phones causes inflammation in the eye. What they're saying, 96% of Asian students now need glasses, and if we don't fix this blue light exposure problem, I think there's going to be an absolute catastrophic increase in macular degeneration with half the population legally blind by the age 50. And that's not me saying that.
No.
That's the scientific research. I don't make anything up. I haven't had an original thought in medicine ever. No, I've never had an original thought in my life.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what the data shows. So I think, and again, blue light toxic for the mitochondria. So ultimately, every disease almost every chronic degenerative disease, and the studies have shown that, comes back to relating to the health of your mitochondria.
And so where does that come into your practice then?
My personal practice or my medical practice?
Your medical practice.
Well, if you ask my patients, they'll say, who's Dr. Greg Emerson? They'll say it's this giant Viking-looking guy who wears wilderness clothes and got these funny yellow glasses on his eyes all the time. So again, somebody sent me this video of a doctor talking about mitochondria health these other days, and he was grossly overweight, and he was sitting in front of an LED screen and a giant projector under LED lights, not protecting his eyes from the blue light, which is probably the most toxic thing to your mitochondria you can imagine. So I'm like, look, if I'm going to teach this stuff, I have to be living it, which is why you and I are doing a podcast, sitting on the grass in the Byron Bay hinterland, rather than sitting in some office somewhere. Because I think congruency and integrity are the big values for me that I find really important. I want to be honest. I want to be thinking I'm doing the right thing, and I want to be living the life. I want to be the Gandhi. I want to be the change you want to see in the world. So, and I've moved my clinic, or I'm moving my clinic from an office which has no natural light to an office in Coolangatta where I can see the beach and I don't need any artificial light. And I've got screens on my computers, and I wear my blue light blocking glasses constantly to protect my eyes from that blue light, because I want to have good eyesight till the end of my days. Now that requires some work in this world because of the LED lights. Do you want to talk about LED lights?
I do.
I think it's a fascinating subject.
Yeah.
So LED lights, the interesting thing about LED lights, and again, this just shows how far we've come from what we call, what's the word for it? Phronesis, which is practical wisdom that we've had for the ages. So we used to have incandescent bulbs, which were those ones that you and I used to burn our fingers on when we had unscrewed because the coil had got so hot. And that was a valuable lesson as we grew up on when to remove incandescent bulbs. And they were a good source of light because that light contained a lot of infrared light. They had the full spectrum of light in here. Basically, it's a little fire in a light bulb. But the problem with them is they weren't very energy efficient. You had to expend 10 units of energy to produce 1 unit of light. So that was wasteful to energy resources. So we developed fluorescent bulbs and LED lights, which are much more energy efficient. You only need 1 unit of energy to produce 1 unit of light with an LED bulb. But it only produces blue light. It's only that isolated spectrum, which has never been on our eyes before and is causing us all kinds of problems. The problem with the LED lights, other than the fact that they just produce blue light which damage our mitochondria, is that they're incredibly good at what they do. So we've gone, okay, shit, these are cheap and they produce good light, let's put them everywhere. So even though we're saving energy per unit and how much energy it takes to produce the light, our cities now, you fly over Brisbane or you fly over Auckland, it's just a beam of blue light projecting up into the sky because we put so many LED lights in. So we haven't really developed the energy changes because we've put in 10 times more lights than we have. And of course, here's the next problem, is the scientific literature is full of the catastrophia that we are inducing in wildlife which lives around the cities, because wildlife rely heavily on their circadian rhythms. And their circadian rhythm is set by the light cycle, the infrared light in the morning, the infrared light in the evening. And that's being disturbed to the wildlife. And so if the fox doesn't know when to hunt and the possum doesn't know when to hide, that system is stuffed. So the scientific literature is full of how we are destroying wildlife around cities. The crazy thing is that you and I are still freaking wildlife. Even though we like to think we're not, we are. We're still wildlife, and we aren't living around this catastrophia. We're living right smack bang in the freaking middle of it. So that's what we have to realise that we've done to ourselves. Oh, and I, don't get me wrong, I'm all for saving the wildlife. You and I love wildlife, but I want to save myself as well. I can't save the wildlife if I'm blind and dead because I've stuffed my mitochondria from living in this giant torch beam of blue light. And I can't quite work out yet why, even though, I can't keep up with the scientific literature on the stuff, but nothing's changing. And then you've got the EMFs that we're adding. We're about to go from 4G to 5G here. And that's that you and I are sitting on the grass now with our bare feet on the ground, and we're doing that. We are getting 10 hertz, 10 waves of electromagnetic radiation coming from the Earth into our bodies. And our body runs, surprisingly, on 10 hertz. Funny how that works, how that us being connected to the Earth, we have the same electromagnetic radiation. When we go to 5G, it is going to be somewhere between about 50 and 80 billion hertz that we are going to be exposed to on a constant basis. It's going to be very hard to. It's like you and I sticking ourselves in a microwave and turn it on and wondering why we're not feeling very good. Living in the microwave while it's running. That's what we're doing to ourselves.
And how much shall we fill of water?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the concern about the LED lights.
So do you think that we are vibrating more now that we're living in these?
Oh, we're
waves?
vibrating more. Yeah, don't worry about that. But that's why we have an epidemic of one of the reasons we have an epidemic of chronic illness. Because we're vibrating the mitochondria, we're bombarding them with electromagnetic frequencies which they've never experienced before. They just can't function properly. As we said, every known degenerative disease almost every known degenerative disease has a mitochondrial dysfunction as its basis, and we completely ruin our mitochondria by the blue light we're staring into, the electromagnetic frequencies, and the fact that our nutrition is suboptimal, and therefore we're not feeding the mitochondria the right electrons.
So what was it? What was my track here? So, damn it, gone blank.
Luckily, you've got an edit function.
Yeah, no, it's all right. We'll throw this in. While I rejig that thought, what would you say is the best? Well, what's the track do you think that we're heading in with chronic disease? You know, we're supposed to live longer, but
well, we're not. I mean, the science is very clear now that the current generation in the US is the first generation where they will be dying earlier than their parents. So the longevity explosion has now reversed, and that's pretty amazing. And of course, the longevity data is a bit biased in that you're talking about how long people are living with disease, which is not necessarily a good thing. What you want to do is live a long time without disease. You want to live long, die short. And I mean, everybody says this, we're now dying long. And we don't want that. We want this good, healthy life for as long as possible, and then you and I cark it when we're up for a surf. That's my goal. Yeah. That's my plan. But of course, what we're doing with longevity data is we're skewing those results because we're counting people who are, living in nursing homes on 20 prescription medications, bedbound. I'm not sure that's the goal. That's why we're being inappropriately reassured by the longevity data. Yeah. You look at the blue zones data, the people who live longest in the world, in Sardinia, in Okinawa, they live very long lives without illness, and that's got to be our goal, not a long life with chronic disease. And they do that because they obey laws of Mother Nature. They know what their purpose is in life. They eat food, they collect and grow their own, they live in extended families, they have faith, they have purpose, they exercise by natural movement, and they live very healthy lives because of that. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel with some along this longevity stuff. We just have to study history and look at what's worked for us as a species in the long term.
So I've remembered what I was thinking, and that was something we were talking about beforehand, and that's fungus and mould. So
it's a fascinating subject.
Yeah. So I had some mould and got rid of it with some extra protein and charcoal, which was a lot of charcoal in the times I wasn't eating. So if I ever got up in the middle of the night, I was down a couple of charcoal.
Yep.
And my girlfriend, this is how I ended up going to an integrative practitioner. She had endometriosis and had the surgery to remove the adhesions, but knew that all that was doing was curing her symptoms, so she wanted to get to the root cause. And again, it was an extensive exposure to mould, and she was a flight attendant at the time. And back to that EMF, the practitioner Steve Joe said that every time she's flying, that's actually giving them a massive vibration and tuning them up and making them feel worse. Why is the fungus and the mould so in tune with what we're in tune with?
Oh, well, I love this subject. So the Earth is, science says that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And for the first 500 million of that 4.5 billion years, there was no life on Earth. And 4 billion years ago, the first life form happened along, and that was called bacteria. Yeah. And they ruled the Earth for the next 2 billion years, which is why they're a pretty freaking smart species, bacteria. And we think we're smarter than them. But when you look at the sophistication of a simple bacteria, it's pretty extraordinary.
And they're in cahoots as well. They swap info.
Yes, yeah. Well, no, exactly, as does even more so fungi. So then something special happened. So 2 billion years ago, one bacteria, a very big bacteria, consumed another smaller bacteria, and I think it's called endosymbiosis. And a little bacteria became the mitochondria of the big bacteria. And from that one-off event, every other life form springs from that event. When that one bacteria consumed another one and it developed mitochondria. Bacteria don't have mitochondria.
Yeah.
So every plant species, every animal species, every fungal species came from that one event 2 billion years ago. Now, the really interesting thing is we actually descended from the fungal line.
Right.
So that means there's really only 2 species on the planet. There's bacteria and there's everything else.
Yeah.
We descended from the fungal line. Now, there's some good news about that and some bad news, because as we all know, there's good and bad in everything. There's good opticians, bad opticians. Good bacteria, bad bacteria. Good fungus, bad fungus. So because we descended from the fungal line, if you look at our cells under a microscope, they're almost indistinguishable from a fungal cell, which is good and bad about that. The good news is that fungi, the right fungi can be our friend. The wrong fungi are very difficult to get rid of because we don't really have a good target to kill a fungi that isn't going to affect us. Whereas with bacteria, because bacteria run on a completely and utterly different metabolism than our cells, which gives us lots of targets to kill them without affecting us. Whereas fungi are very similar to us. It's a bit like you and I discussing before the difference between a benign tumour and a malignant tumour. In some ways, it is, and it's a strange thing to say, I know, but in sometimes it's actually better to have a malignant tumour than a benign tumour, because benign tumours are exactly the same as you and I. A mole is a benign tumour, and it's very difficult for me to kill a mole, one of my moles, without also killing me, because they're exactly the same cell. I don't have any targets for it. So basically, you've got a mole you want removed, you just have to chop it out. Fairly rudimentary technique. Whereas a malignant tumour runs on a completely different metabolism. So it gives us lots of targets to try and kill it. I don't have any targets to kill a benign tumour. If you've got a slowly growing benign tumour in your brain, which is at a site which is inoperable, we've got nothing for you, and it's just going to slow and crush everything. Whereas if you've got a malignant brain tumour, at least I've got some tools that I can use to try and kill those cells. And that's the problem with the fungi, which is bad for us, is I have very, very limited tools to use to kill it. Whereas I've got lots of antibiotics to kill a bacteria because they're a different, they're different species from us completely. Yeah. So I've got lots of different weapons to use which are going to target it and not target me. Now the good news about the fungi, so that's the bad fungi. Yeah. So we don't want to live in a house full of toxic mold. That's bad for us. The good news about fungi is that 30% of the soil that you and I are currently sitting on is made out of fungus. Yeah. There's a massive biomat of fungus underneath us, which actually produces the soil. If we didn't have fungus, we'd have no soil. If we didn't have soil, we wouldn't have any plants. Yeah. The interesting thing is that the sworn enemy of fungus is bacteria. They hate each other, which is why most antibiotics we use come from fungus. Right. In fact, the data is pretty clear that it is antibiotics, i.e. penicillin, which swung the tide in World War II. Yeah. Because even though penicillin, and it's extraordinary to think we didn't really have antibiotics until 1941, when you think about human history.
And it's still there.
Yes, yes. And because they found penicillin in 1929, but it was too weak. It was too weak a strain to have a clinical effect. And it wasn't until 1941 until somebody came along, I think it was a mouldy mango in some market, and a scientist found this mouldy mango in a market in London which had a much stronger strain of penicillium, that we developed penicillin. So the British and the American forces had access to penicillin in 1941 when the Germans and the Japanese didn't. And it was one of the reasons that the war was swung in our favour. So the thing about fungus is because it's surrounded by its swarm enemy, which is bacteria. So the soil is full of bacteria, and fungus has to live in the soil, and it is separated by trillions of bacteria by one cell layer. One cell separates fungus from its sworn enemy. So fungus over the last 2 billion years has developed an extraordinary pharmacopoeia of medicinal substance to protect itself against bacteria and viruses which live in the soil. So if you want a great tool against bacteria and viruses, which are starting to ruin our health, then that's going to come from fungus. And the data is also very clear that fungus always survives any catastrophic event. So, Paul Stamets always talks about if you want to survive a catastrophic event, hitch your wagon to fungus, because it's got survival things. And again, fungus with this mass, we haven't even begun to tap the massive pharmaceuticals which good fungus can produce. We haven't started to tap that. There's an extraordinary amount of tools that we have there yet, which we can start to utilise by adopting, medicinal edible mushrooms in our diet.
Yeah. So how would you attack a bad mold?
Well, again, the principles of mold exposure are very clear. One, you don't want to expose yourself to it excessively. Yeah. Now, you can't live in a mold-free environment. Mold's everywhere, but you don't want to be living in a house with mold all over the wall. Yeah. Black toxic mold. So you make sure your environment has minimal levels of mold. You then look at your diet, because fungus feeds on sugar. Yeah. So you need to move your diet from being high carbohydrate to more healthy fat. You don't increase the protein, you increase the healthy fat. That was one of the mistakes that we made, was we went, okay, let's not eat carbohydrates, let's fill up on protein. Yeah. It's healthy fat that you want. So it's the environment, it's the diet, then you've got to utilise some sort of agent to help you kill the mould, and then you utilise an agent which reduces the biofilm, which is a layer of snot which mould covers itself in, and then you use some sort of agent which absorbs the toxins which the mould produces. So it's environment free of mould, diet which doesn't feed it, some sort of antifungal agent, a biofilm agent, and a soak up the mycotoxin agent. You can also add an advanced detoxification process as well, and that's mainly to do with when the fungus dies. Like cancer, when it dies, it basically releases a lot of toxins from dying cells which flood the liver. So, advanced mold strategies always include some sort of way of protecting the liver from the massive die-off of the mold or of cancer.
Nice. And so, do you believe that our cruciferous vegetables are one of our best liver detoxes?
Yeah, no, I don't believe anything.
You do. That's what you.
The data is very clear. Yeah. Cruciferous vegetables are fantastic. Cooked, maybe not raw because of their effect on the thyroid, but once they cooked or even steamed, the goitrogens go away. But I mean, cruciferous vegetables are our best friends, you and I, because they keep our estrogen levels low, and the lower we can keep our estrogen levels, the higher our testosterone will be, and that's a big bonus for me. I want to keep my testosterone level as high as possible for as long as possible. They're the best friend of women because the indole-3 carbinol in the cruciferous vegetables makes them, when they metabolize their estrogen, they can either metabolize it to a good estrogen, which prevents cancer, which is the 2-hydroxyestrone, or they metabolize it to the 16-hydroxyestrone, which is cancer proliferative. It makes cancer grow. And the indole-3 carbinol in the cruciferous vegetables makes them produce more of the 2-one than the 16. So it's great for us. It's great for women. And because plants are full of medicinal substance, which help us keep our microbiological load down to a level that we can live in harmony with. So you're getting the immune benefits of the cruciferous vegetables, you're getting the hormonal benefits for both men and women.
Nice. So you've picked up a book on the psilocybin mushrooms, and what are the sort of medicinal mushrooms that we can tap into? And I've been lucky enough to have Mason from Superfeast talk us through medicinal mushrooms.
Right. Yeah, look, medicinal mushrooms are a fantastic field and ever-emerging research area. And I suppose the main ones that people would know about would be the wood fungi, particularly reishi and chaga. And they've definitely got immune-boosting benefits. And they've been used historically. In fact, that's where the fascinating concept of the stoned ape theory comes from. Yeah. Where we think that, I think somehow over a very short period of time, you and I went from kind of hairy primates in trees to a much more developed species with a much larger brain. And the two theories behind what allowed our brain to get much bigger so quickly was one that we discovered seafood. That is, the Ice Age came along and deforestation. We climbed out of the trees and we started walking to the coast where we discovered seafood as a diet, which gave us DHA, the omega-3, one of the omega-3 acids from seafood. And DHA is a fantastic subject on your own because most of our brain is made of DHA. So it allowed this enlarging of our brain. The other fascinating thing is about the light signals from the sun, which set our circadian rhythm. It get turned from a light signal into an electrical signal for our brain by DHA. So you're deficient in DHA because you don't eat seafood. Your circadian rhythm's not going to work as well. And all aside, the guy who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine last year won it in the circadian rhythm. So DHA is incredibly important for brain development. It's incredibly important for our circadian rhythm. The other thing to know is that the electrons which we want trying to push into our mitochondria to produce energy and heat get into the mitochondria through DHA. It's the keyhole into the furnace. If you ain't got a keyhole, doesn't matter how much good food you're eating if it's not getting into the mitochondria. So that's how we think. One theory is that it was the addition of seafood to our diet which allowed the massive expansion of our brain. And the other one was mushrooms, particularly the psilocybin mushrooms, which is just a theory. But again, it's what thought was, the data is very, very clear that psilocybin mushrooms allow for the opening up of new neural pathways in the brain. That has been documented. And we think that's a theory that led our ancient ancestors to go, hey, look at this rock, isn't that pretty? To, hey, maybe we can shape this rock into, a spear or a knife or something, this new neural pathways that allowed us, our expanding brains, to become more creative. So that's how important fungi are to us and how important seafood are. A lot of my meals are a piece of fish with some mushrooms. That's a really good meal, and some cruciferous vegetables. You put your plate, you put a piece of fish on there cooked in some ghee, so you get your healthy fats. You got a bit of avocado, you got some cruciferous mushrooms, you got some cruciferous vegetables and some mushrooms. You're on a damn good ancestral diet right there, and that's nutrition. As T.D. Jake says, I've just preached, I don't need to do anymore. You don't need to write any more frickin' books on nutrition. Just set up your plate like that, you're home and hosed. The only reason you're buying more books on nutrition is to sell some books, and I think it's disgusting. The science is clear. And we don't need any more books on nutrition. We don't need Dr. Greg Emerson's diet book. Come on. I know I've got an ego, but it's not going to go that far. People say, when are you going to write a book, Greg? Greg's not writing a book because the book's been written. The book's been written for 2 billion years. I always say we're the only species on the planet which get confused about what we're meant to be eating. We should have a seafood diet. We should have medicinal plants in that diet. We should have some healthy fats in that diet, and we should have some mushrooms in that diet, and you're home and hosed. You don't need to think of anything else. And you should be having that for breakfast as well. We're the only, probably the Western culture is the only culture. You and I travel to Vietnam, they're not having Weet-Bix and toast for breakfast. They're having some sort of vegetable soup, with a ginseng tea for breakfast. So, we just have to look back in time to work out a diet. You and I go to the airport today, there'll be 10 more nutrition books on the shelf at the thing. I don't know, how come we haven't got it right yet? Why do we need new books? We haven't got it right because we're ignoring the past.
That's right. And
where the Maori have that saying, I can't remember what it is now, but it says, to know how to go forward, you've got to look backwards. And we've ignored a lot of that in terms of nutrition. Right, where were we? How do we get onto that? We were talking about eating mushrooms. The medicinal mushrooms. So you can't eat reishi and chaga because they're hardwood mushrooms. Remember, the mushroom is the fruiting body of the mycelium mass in the ground. In fact, most of the medicine comes in the mycelium rather than the mushroom, the fruiting body. So if you can get, mushrooms where there's also some, particularly supplements where there's some mycelium in there as well, you get more medicinal products. So reishi and chaga are good to drink as either alcohol or water extracts. You've got the edible mushrooms, particularly the shiitake, the oyster nut mushrooms, the enoki mushroom. That's a really long stalked one, and Paul Stamets talks about the research from Japan where the populations, the only thing they do different to the rest of the population in Japan, because they live in a enoki producing area of the country, is eat shitloads of enoki mushrooms. Their rates of cancer are dramatically lower than the rest of the population. So enoki mushroom, oyster mushroom, shiitake mushrooms, they'd probably be the main edible ones. And then you've got your other ones, which are the psilocybin mushrooms, which again, scientific research is looking very carefully at those, because the psilocybin from those mushrooms undoubtedly has a therapeutic benefit in terms of expanding neural pathways and also helping with some psychological issues, particularly a post-traumatic stress disorder type stuff. And the science is very clear, and there's now a movement. There's the movement to legalise marijuana has progressed a long way, and the next movement's going to be to legalise the use of psilocybin as a therapeutic tool.
Yeah, I think MAPS for the PTSD is, I know that might be MDMA instead, but yeah, Johns Hopkins and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of science going on with it now.
It's pretty amazing.
Whether or not you and I should have to pay $500 a month for a medicinal weed and $500 a month for a mushroom is another debate.
Yeah, it's the sort of the biggest societal pressure on the way we get healthy, I guess.
Yes. So you've got to find a way of making a shitload of money out of us getting healthy, which I am opposed to somebody limiting my access to natural medicines given to us by Mother Earth, limiting my access for profit.
No. How do you feel then about our treatment of sickness making a shitload of money?
Well, I have strong feelings both ways.
Yeah.
I think if you need that, there's two systems. There's I'm never going to get sick system because I'm going to take responsibility for my health.
Yeah.
And then there's I'm going to abdicate responsibility for my health. And we did that with the discovery of drugs.
Yeah.
We went, whoa, this is pretty cool. We've got these little white pills now. It doesn't matter what we drink. It doesn't matter what we eat. It doesn't matter how much we exercise. When something goes wrong, we can have surgery or a little white pill. And that for a while seems to be working pretty well. But now we're finding that it's not working nearly as well as we thought, and we're running out of surgeries and pills to fix problems. So now the kind of circle of health is coming back to, okay, we better start taking more responsibility. And, I think, it costs a lot of money to run a hospital. It costs a lot of money to do drug research. It costs a lot of money to run my clinic.
Yeah.
My goal is, that they say doctors in China used to get remunerated. You were a doctor in a small town in China, you got remunerated for how few patients you had, not for how many you have.
Yeah.
Your goal was to stop people getting sick. Then you got remunerated. If you had a very sick population in your town, you weren't getting nearly as much remuneration. So, I think it's now up to us to say, okay, well, that system has failed us. Or no, don't get me wrong, that system is amazing. The medical system is amazing for what it was set up to be.
Yes.
And it was set up to fix the main problems of the day, which were trauma and infection.
Yeah.
And that system is still extraordinarily amazing. You have a car accident, you get yourself to hospital. You'll get the most amazing care today that we've ever had in the past. You need an MRI, go there. You need an infection. Up until 1941, people were dying of infections all over the place.
Yeah.
That's very rare now. So that system is still extraordinary for that paradigm. The problem is that's not what we're all dying of anymore. We are dying of chronic degenerative disease caused by lifestyle, caused by exposure to toxins, caused by some of the little white pills. I'm seeing people in my clinic who are on 10, 15 prescription medications saying they don't feel very good. Well, you're not going to feel very good on 10 prescription medications. So we have got to find some way ourselves of reversing that degenerative illness, and ultimately no one's coming to save us from that. We have to learn how to do that for ourselves, which is where I start to get slightly, I don't know what the right word is, but I start to question the concept that my access to natural medicines is being limited for the sake of profit.
Yeah.
When I need those to adopt the healthy lifestyle. I don't want to be charged, it's like charging me $500 a month to get access to broccoli. I don't want to pay $500 a month for broccoli. I want to grow it myself in my backyard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Am I wrong?
No.
Thank you.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I knew you would.
And so you dabbled in farming for a little while.
I dabbled would be a good word, yes. And I wouldn't use the word that I failed at it, but it became overwhelming for me to do by myself, to run a busy medical clinic and operate a farm full time.
Yeah.
I probably took too many bites out of the cherry.
Yeah. And so what was the passion for farming, and why did the passion for medicine win out?
The passion for farming was twofold. One, I wanted to start producing my own food.
Yeah.
Be responsible for the food that I put in my mouth. And the second one was when my marriage ended, my ex-wife would say, you don't even know one end of a hammer from another.
Uh-huh.
And I think she found that important in a man for some reason. And she was probably right. I knew one end of a scalpel from the other, and one end of an endotracheal tube from the other, and I was very good with those. But hammers and screwdrivers, not really my forte. And so to be brutally honest with myself, a big part of it was, as usual, saying, okay, let me prove to you that I can do that. Mm-hmm. So for 8 years, I lived, in the middle of nowhere, producing my own food. I'm not going to use the word failed, but in the end I had to stop because it became overwhelming for me. But it was an amazing lesson. I did want to go and learn how to survive in the wilderness. Yeah. I did want to learn how to, fix a pipe, and how to use a screwdriver and a hammer, and how to cope with adversity, and what I was going to do, how to operate a generator so that when the, lights went out, because, I was on solar power out there. Yeah. So, and there was, because it's Australia, there's lots of climate catastrophes where, we were plagued by floods in that 8 years, and I'd have no power, so I had to learn how to run generators and stuff. So even though, I'm not doing it now, and I've moved on more to a nomadic hunter-gatherer existence, which I'm exploring now, those 8 years gave me incredible valuable lessons in resilience and overcoming adversity, and how to survive when, creature comforts were taken away from me.
Beautiful. Mate, I don't know if you want to talk about your practice at all, but where do people find you?
So I have a new website coming out, which is www.drgregemerson.com. I'm on Facebook under Dr. Greg Emerson's mitochondrial medicine and biohacking page. And I have a YouTube channel, Dr. Greg Emerson, which I put some videos on occasionally, and my Instagram page, where I'm basically putting on photos of me living this life. Because again, that comes under congruency. You're not going to see posed pictures of me doing something there. You're going to see me taking responsibility for my own health on my Instagram page.
Beautiful. And so what would you like to leave people with, thought, or a way you live your life, or even an ask if you would?
Well, I suppose I was thinking about when I was driving down. I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast when I drove down, and he was interviewing Tyson Fury, the famous Gypsy King boxer, and he was talking about his battle with mental illness and his battle with depression. And he was talking about the thing that saved him from that was discovering his purpose in life. And I think it doesn't matter where you look in the wellness literature, that's probably number one, knowing what your purpose is in life. It doesn't matter if it's in the Blue Zones literature. It doesn't matter if it's in the anthropological literature. It doesn't matter if it's in the sports performance literature. Mm-hmm. That's why, that book, Legacy by the All Blacks, that's not only an amazing business book, that is an amazing health book. Wow. When you read about Richie McCaw and Dan Carter changing the philosophy, if you like, of the All Blacks, by being the last ones in the changing room, cleaning up the changing rooms at the end of the day. When you see Dan Carter and Richie McCaw staying behind to clean up the dressing rooms after the game, you're going to start lifting your game. And those guys revolutionised the All Blacks by changing the purpose of their existence. The All Blacks went from a very good team to an extraordinary team, perhaps the best sports team in the history of the planet. Yeah. by changing their purpose and the legacy they wanted to leave. So I think probably, and people say to me, I don't know what my purpose it is. Well, make it up. You know, you don't have to wait for the lightning bolt.
Yeah.
You just have to have one. That might be, and the thing about purpose is it can't just be about yourself. It's got to be about benefit for other people as well. Now that might be, my purpose is to keep my front garden extraordinary. Oh, and the survival literature is also very clear.
Yeah.
That the people who survive a survival emergency, the person in a life raft who will survive is the one which decides their purpose is to look after all the other people in the raft. That's been documented in survival literature. So probably the number one thing is to know what your purpose is in life and have that also involving somebody else. As I said, that might be my purpose in life is to have the best front garden so people walking past it feel better every day. You will live a lot longer by knowing what that purpose is in life. So I suppose that's the biggest thing. And then if you have a purpose in life, that then leads on to taking responsibility. Because once you know what your purpose is, it motivates you to take responsibility for yourself. And I think that's what Tyson Fury was saying. He was saying, I was a 400-kilo ex-boxer, 400-pound ex-boxer, who was going to kill himself until I discovered what my purpose was in life. And by doing that, I was able to take responsibility for myself. So I think probably that's a lesson for all of us, and it's certainly the lesson that I remind myself when I had some battles with depression about what was my purpose in life. And that's also not just Tyson Fury, but helped me get out of it.
Beautiful. Thanks very much, Greg. It's a pleasure to meet in person.
It was fun.
Yeah. And enjoy the rest of the weekend and safe trip back up to the Gold Coast.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, mate. And let's hope it's there.
How is you think the sound's going to be okay?
What a way to finish the year, and that pretty much sums up what the Stag Rule is all about. Exploring your options, finding your passion, and then taking responsibility for your life and your health. I love Greg's work there, and it'll be awesome to get him back on the show at some point, because we could have talked for hours and hours and hours, but I had to be back at home to give Alex a hand, and I was already overdue. So, yep, until next time, we'll have to get Greg back on, and I'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts of what you thought of what Greg had to say there. Of course, our episodes are brought to you by Waiketo, Waiketo, on Facebook. You can find all of the podcasts there, plus plenty of other little articles about low carb, high fat, things like mitochondria, cold exposure, all those random things that I'm interested in, as well as a few snaps from at Stag Vision. And of course, if you'd like to order exogenous ketones and you're in New Zealand, hit me up on Waiketo's Facebook page or at Stag Vision on Instagram. Otherwise, if you're in Australia, Canada, US or Asia, head over to waiket0.pruvitnow, proveitnow.com, and you can order them for yourself, get them delivered to your door, easy peasy, and get into ketosis in under 30 minutes. Great way to be, and a great tool for transitioning into a ketogenic lifestyle, maximizing the function of those mitochondria, getting their energy right, getting great sleep, and if you've had a brain injury like me, helping to get that recover. If you're a sports person, helping yourself operate on optimal fuel, also to recover faster. Things like lowering inflammation, it's all there. Exogenous ketones, PRUVITNOW, is that Waiketo at proveitnow.com. Cheers, guys.